2 years ago, he believed a rumor and lost the only person who ever saw his heart. Now, the most powerful man in the city would give anything to find the woman he never should have let go. The Kong mansion had everything a person could imagine. 30,000 square feet of marble floors, towering windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, priceless artwork lining every hallway, and rooms so large they seemed designed for royalty. Yet on this quiet evening, the mansion felt emptier than it ever had before. Alexander Kim stood alone in the grand entrance hall, his hand resting lightly on the polished wooden table where a small silver key sat untouched. It was the same key Emily Carter had returned 2 years earlier. The key to the staff quarters. The key she placed down the night she left without asking for forgiveness, without demanding an explanation, and without looking back. Alexander, known throughout the city as the Korean Mafia Boss who controlled every room he entered, had faced countless difficult decisions in his life. But none had followed him like this one. Because this was not about business. It was not about power. It was about the one decision he made when he should have listened. His eyes moved toward the quiet corner of the mansion where Emily used to prepare morning coffee before sunrise. She had never been loud. She had never tried to impress anyone. She simply noticed things other people ignored. She remembered that his mother preferred her tea slightly warmer on cold mornings. She noticed when the youngest staff member was struggling and quietly helped without expecting praise. She treated every person in the mansion with the same respect, whether they were a guest wearing a designer suit or someone cleaning the floors after midnight. To everyone else, Emily was just a maid. To Alexander, she had slowly become the only person who made his enormous home feel like a place where people actually lived. But 2 years earlier, everything changed because of one rumor. A rumor that claimed Emily had betrayed the trust of the Kim family. A rumor supported by carefully arranged words and convincing details. Alexander remembered the night clearly. He remembered the disappointment in Emily's eyes more than the accusation itself. He remembered expecting her to defend herself. Instead, she simply looked at him and said, "I wish you had asked me before you believed them." Those words stayed with him longer than any argument ever could. At the time, Alexander thought distance would make the decision easier. He thought replacing one employee would solve the problem. He was wrong. The mansion continued, but something important disappeared with her. The warmth in the kitchen. The quiet kindness in the hallways. The feeling that someone inside the walls actually cared. For 24 months, Alexander searched for answers. He reviewed old records, questioned people he once trusted, and followed every small clue that might lead him back to Emily Carter. Not because he needed a maid. Not because his household could not function without her. But because he finally understood what he had lost. He had lost the one person who never cared about his reputation, his wealth, or his power. She only cared about the person underneath it all. And after 2 years of searching, Alexander Kim was closer than ever to finding the woman whose absence had changed everything. Before Alexander Kim ever searched the city for Emily Carter, there was a time when she was simply the quiet woman who walked through his mansion before sunrise and made a place filled with power feel strangely human. 2 years earlier, Emily had arrived at the Kong estate carrying a small suitcase, a simple resume, and the determination to build a life through her own effort. She did not know much about Alexander beyond the name everyone spoke about carefully. She knew he was wealthy. She knew he was respected. She knew people around him treated his presence with unusual seriousness. But Emily had never been interested in titles. She had always believed that a person's true character appeared in the way they treated those who could do nothing for them in return. From her first week inside the mansion, she became someone people quietly depended on. She remembered the gardener's injured wrist and adjusted the heavy flower arrangements so he would not have to carry them. She noticed the young kitchen assistant was nervous during his first month and encouraged him until he gained confidence. She prepared breakfast for Alexander's mother exactly the way she liked it, even though nobody had ever asked her to learn those details. She simply paid attention. That was who Emily Carter was. She was not trying to be noticed. She was simply kind when nobody expected kindness. Alexander noticed her before he admitted that he noticed her. At first, he only recognized her efficiency. The mansion ran smoother when she was there. Small problems disappeared before they became bigger ones. Guests felt welcomed. Employees felt respected. But what surprised him most was that Emily never treated him differently. Everyone around Alexander carefully measured their words. They considered his position before speaking. They saw the power attached to his name. Emily did not. When she brought his morning coffee, she did not act nervous. When she answered a question, she did not flatter him. She simply spoke with quiet honesty. One evening, Alexander returned home later than usual after a difficult business meeting. The mansion was silent, and most employees had already finished their shifts. As he walked through the kitchen, he found Emily preparing a small meal and placing it aside. "You should eat before it gets cold," she said calmly. Alexander looked at the plate, then at her. "You waited?" he asked. Emily shook her head. "No, sir. I just noticed nobody had prepared anything." It was such a simple answer, yet it stayed with him. She did not say she was worried. She did not say she cared. She simply acted because she saw someone needed help. Over time, Alexander began to realize that Emily was different from everyone else in his world. She did not want access to his influence. She did not seek rewards. She did not ask questions about his private life. She only brought a sense of peace into a home that had forgotten what peace felt like. But kindness can sometimes become a weakness in the eyes of people who misunderstand it. While Alexander slowly began trusting Emily, others inside the mansion began noticing the connection between them. They saw the respect she earned. They saw the way the household changed around her. And for reasons Emily never understood, that quiet acceptance became the beginning of a rumor that would eventually destroy everything. A rumor Alexander would believe before he realized the truth about the woman he had already come to value. The first sign that something was wrong appeared on an ordinary Tuesday morning, when a single conversation changed the way everyone inside the Kong mansion looked at Emily Carter. Until that moment, she had been the person most employees trusted and most guests quietly respected. But rumors rarely begin with facts. They begin with small pieces of information twisted into something that feels believable. The rumor started when a private document from the Kong family office was found missing. It was not a document that could be understood by outsiders, but it contained personal information that Alexander kept carefully protected. Within hours, whispers moved through the mansion. Someone had accessed restricted areas. Someone had shared private details. Someone close to the family could not be trusted. At first, Alexander ignored the speculation. He had built his reputation by making careful decisions, not emotional ones. But then a few carefully chosen words reached him. Words suggesting Emily had been seen near the office. Words suggesting she knew more than she should. Words suggesting that perhaps her kindness had been nothing more than a way to gain trust. The people spreading the rumor never accused her directly at first. They only asked questions. Is it possible? Have you noticed how much she knows about the household? What if she has been hiding something? Those questions created doubt faster than any accusation could. Alexander remembered Emily's honesty. He remembered her quiet actions and the way she treated everyone with respect. But he also remembered that trust was dangerous in his world. He had spent years protecting his family by expecting the unexpected. And that instinct, the same instinct that made him powerful, became the reason he failed to see the truth. Emily noticed the change before anyone said anything. The warm greetings from some employees became shorter. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. People who once smiled at her suddenly looked uncertain. She did not understand why, but she knew something had shifted. Still, she continued doing her work. She prepared meals. She organized the household. She helped Alexander's mother with the same patience she always had. She believed that eventually the truth would become clear. But the distance between her and Alexander continued growing. One evening, Alexander stood in his private office holding the report that had fueled the rumors. Emily stood across from him, calm but confused. She looked at him, waiting for the question she believed would allow her to explain everything. Instead, Alexander asked, "Is there anything you want to tell me?" The question hurt more than any accusation because it showed that he was already uncertain about her. Emily slowly realized that he was not asking because he trusted her. He was asking because he was searching for a reason to doubt her. "If you are asking whether I betrayed this family," she said quietly, "the answer is no." Alexander looked away for a moment. He wanted to believe her. A part of him already did. But the voices around him had planted a seed of doubt, and he allowed that doubt to become louder than his own memories. The decision came the next morning. Emily was called into the main hall, where the conversation she never expected finally happened. Alexander spoke with a controlled voice. explaining that he could no longer keep her in the mansion while questions remained unanswered. Emily listened without interruption. She did not beg. She did not argue. She simply placed her keys on the table and looked at the man she had respected for so long. "I understand," she said softly, "but I hope one day you will remember that trust is not proven by how someone reacts when they are accused. It is proven by whether you believe them before they had to defend themselves." Then she walked away from the Kong mansion, leaving behind the only home she had known for years. And Alexander Kim watched her leave, unaware that the silence after her departure would become the loudest regret of his life. The morning after Emily Carter left the Kong mansion, Alexander Kim expected the world to feel the same. He expected the quiet halls to continue their normal rhythm. He expected the household staff to continue their duties. He expected himself to move forward as he had done after every difficult decision before. But the mansion felt different from the moment he walked through the entrance. The difference was not something he could see. It was something he could feel. The house was still beautiful, still perfectly maintained, still filled with expensive furniture and priceless artwork. Yet the warmth that once existed between those walls had disappeared. The kitchen was the first place Alexander noticed it. Every morning, Emily had prepared coffee before anyone else arrived. She knew exactly how his mother preferred her tea and how the younger employees liked their breakfast during busy mornings. None of those details seemed important when she was there because they happened naturally. Now, without her, everyone followed instructions, but nobody noticed the little things. Alexander told himself it was temporary. He told himself the mansion would adjust. But days became weeks, and the absence of Emily Carter became impossible to ignore. His mother was the first person to mention it. One afternoon, while sitting near the garden windows, she quietly asked, "Have you spoken to Emily?" Alexander paused before answering. The matter was handled. His mother looked at him carefully. "That was not my question." Those words stayed with him. For years, Alexander had been surrounded by people who avoided challenging him. They agreed with him because they feared disappointing him. But his mother had always been different. She saw the difference between being powerful and being right. "You knew her character for years," she said softly. "Yet you believed a rumor after hearing it for a few hours." Alexander had no answer. Because deep down, he knew she was right. He began reviewing everything connected to the situation. The report that started the rumors. The conversations that influenced his decision. The timeline of events before Emily was dismissed. Slowly, small details began to feel unusual. The accusations had appeared too quickly. The information had reached him too conveniently. The people who questioned Emily's loyalty had never actually shown proof. They had only created doubt. For the first time, Alexander wondered if he had not protected his family from a threat. Maybe he had pushed away the person who had protected his family all along. He started asking questions that should have been asked 2 years earlier. Former employees remembered Emily differently than the rumors described her. They remembered her kindness. They remembered her honesty. They remembered how she stayed late to help others, even when nobody knew. One former employee told Alexander something that he could never forget. "She never wanted anything from this family, sir. She only wanted to do her job and be respected." That sentence followed him everywhere. Alexander Kim had spent his entire life understanding the value of loyalty, but he had failed to recognize the quietest form of it. Emily never demanded trust. She earned it every day through actions that were easy to overlook. As the months passed, Alexander began searching for her. Not because he needed someone to manage his mansion. Not because his life was incomplete without an employee. He searched because he needed to know where she was, how she was doing, and whether there was any chance to repair the mistake he had made. But Emily Carter had disappeared from the world he knew. No social media, no public appearances, no easy answers. The woman who had once walked through his home every morning had become someone he could no longer reach. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Kim discovered that money, influence, and power could not buy back the trust of someone who had already been hurt. For the first time in years, Alexander Kim realized that finding someone could be harder than protecting everything he already owned. He had access to resources most people could only imagine. His name opened doors. His connections reached across the city. When he wanted information, people usually found answers quickly. But Emily Carter was different. She had never wanted attention, and now that she was gone, there was almost nothing left behind for him to follow. 2 years earlier, She had walked away from the Kong mansion carrying only her personal belongings and the quiet disappointment of someone who had trusted the wrong person. Alexander searched for her through every reasonable path. He contacted former employers, reviewed old records, and followed every small detail connected to the life she had built before and after leaving his home. Each discovery revealed the same thing. Emily had not disappeared because she was hiding from the truth. She had simply continued living the same way she always had, quietly helping others and asking for nothing in return. One afternoon, Alexander received a message from someone who had once worked with Emily at a community center. The person remembered her because she had spent months helping organize supplies for families who needed assistance. She never used Alexander's name. She never mentioned the mansion. She never told anyone about the powerful family she had once worked for. She was simply Emily. That detail affected Alexander more than he expected. In his world, people often introduced themselves through achievements, connections, and status. Emily had done the opposite. She had removed every advantage she could have used and allowed people to see only who she truly was. As Alexander continued searching, he began discovering small pieces of the life she had created after leaving. She worked a simple job. She lived in a modest apartment. She spent her free time helping elderly neighbors and volunteering whenever she could. The same person who had cared for everyone inside his mansion was still caring for people outside it. Nothing about her had changed. The only difference was that Alexander was finally seeing what had always been there. During those 2 years, the Kong mansion also changed. Alexander became quieter. The people around him noticed that he no longer accepted information without questioning it. He listened more carefully. He asked for proof instead of assumptions. His decisions became slower but wiser. The man who once believed strength meant always being certain began learning that true strength required the humility to admit when he was wrong. One evening, Alexander stood in the same hallway where Emily had returned her keys 2 years earlier. He remembered her final words. She had not asked him to apologize. She had not asked him to search for her. She had only hoped that one day he would understand the importance of believing someone before forcing them to prove their innocence. That night, Alexander made a promise to himself. If he found Emily Carter, he would not ask her to return because he needed her. He would not use his influence to convince her. He would simply tell her the truth. He was wrong, and he would accept whatever decision she made. Because after 2 years of searching, Alexander finally understood that the person he had been looking for was never someone who completed his life. She was someone who reminded him what kind of man he wanted to become. The 2-year search that changed Alexander Kim was about to reach the moment he had imagined countless times. Yet nothing could prepare him for how different reality would feel. After months of following small clues, Alexander finally received information that led him to a quiet neighborhood outside the center of Chicago. It was not the kind of place people would associate with someone connected to the most powerful families in the city. There were small local stores, peaceful streets, and ordinary homes where neighbors greeted each other by name. It was exactly the kind of place Emily Carter would choose. She had never been impressed by luxury. She had always valued peace more than appearances. Alexander stood across the street from a small community building where Emily volunteered several afternoons each week. For a few minutes, he did not move. He simply watched. Through the large front windows, he saw the same person he remembered from the mansion. Emily was helping organize supplies, speaking kindly with elderly residents, and listening carefully to every person who approached her. 2 years had passed, yet the most important things about her had not changed. She still made people feel seen. She still treated everyone with patience. She still carried the same quiet warmth that had once filled the Kong mansion. Alexander realized something that surprised him. He had spent 2 years searching for Emily because he thought he needed to find the woman who had left. But the person standing in front of him was not someone waiting to be rescued or someone hoping for revenge. She had built a peaceful life without him. She had healed without his apology. She had continued being the same person even after he failed her. That realization made approaching her more difficult. For the first time, Alexander Kim, a man who had never hesitated before making important decisions, felt uncertain. He could negotiate with powerful people. He could solve complicated problems. But he could not force someone to forgive him. Eventually, Emily stepped outside carrying a small box of donated books. She stopped when she saw him. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The city continued moving around them. cars passing on the street, people walking by, but their attention remained on each other. Emily's expression showed surprise, but not anger. That almost made it harder for Alexander. He had prepared himself for disappointment. He had expected resentment. He had expected her to remind him of the pain he caused. Instead, she simply looked at him with the same calm eyes he remembered. "You found me," she said softly. Alexander nodded. "I did." He wanted to say many things. He wanted to explain the mistakes he made, the doubts he carried, and the regret that followed him every day. But he understood that this moment was not about making excuses. "I was wrong," he finally said. The words were simple, but they carried more weight than any powerful speech he had ever given. Emily looked away briefly, remembering the night she left the mansion. "You believed people who wanted you to doubt me," she answered quietly. Alexander lowered his eyes. Yes. There was no defense, no explanation, only honesty. And for Emily, that was the first sign that the man standing before her was not exactly the same person who had watched her leave 2 years earlier. The conversation had only begun, but for the first time since their separation, the distance between them no longer felt impossible to cross. The meeting between Alexander Kim and Emily Carter was only the beginning of a conversation that had been waiting for 2 years. They stood outside the community building as the afternoon sunlight slowly moved across the quiet neighborhood, surrounded by ordinary people who had no idea that the man standing there controlled a world far different from theirs. But Emily had never cared about the world attached to Alexander's name. She only cared about the person standing in front of her. Alexander took a slow breath before speaking again. "I owe you the truth," he said. "Not an explanation, not an excuse. The truth." Emily remained silent, allowing him to continue. For the first time, Alexander did not try to control the direction of a conversation. He did not choose his words to protect his image. He simply admitted what he had spent 2 years avoiding. He had allowed a rumor to become more powerful than the trust Emily had earned through years of actions. He had looked at evidence without questioning who created it. He had listened to voices around him instead of remembering the person he knew. "I thought I was protecting my family," Alexander said quietly. "But I was protecting my own assumptions." Those words surprised Emily because they were not the words of the man who dismissed her 2 years earlier. Back then, Alexander had been a person who believed certainty was strength. Now, he understood that admitting a mistake required a different kind of courage. Emily looked toward the street for a moment before answering. "Do you know what hurt the most?" she asked. Alexander waited. "It was not losing my job. It was not leaving the mansion. It was realizing that someone I respected never truly asked if I was telling the truth." Her voice remained calm, but the memory still carried weight. Alexander accepted every word without interruption. He knew he deserved to hear it. During the following weeks, he did not try to convince Emily to return to the Kong mansion. He did not offer expensive gifts or use his influence to make her life easier. Instead, he did something completely unfamiliar to him. He listened. He visited the community center when invited. He helped support projects that Emily cared about without attaching his name to them. He showed through actions that his apology was not temporary emotion. It was a commitment to change. Emily noticed the difference. The man she remembered had always been powerful, but he had rarely allowed himself to be vulnerable. The man in front of her now was still powerful, but he was finally learning how to be humble. Meanwhile, Alexander continued investigating the original rumor because he wanted Emily to know the truth was not forgotten. He discovered that the information used against her had been manipulated by people who wanted to create distance between her and the Kong family. The details had been rearranged. Conversations had been misunderstood intentionally. A simple misunderstanding had been transformed into something that destroyed trust. When Alexander finally revealed what he had discovered, Emily listened quietly. She was not surprised that the rumor had been false. Deep down, she had always known the truth. What mattered was that Alexander finally knew it too. For the first time in 2 years, the distance between them began to disappear. Not because the past had vanished, but because someone had finally accepted responsibility for it. And Alexander understood that finding Emily was only the first step. Earning back her trust would require patience, honesty, and the same respect she had given him from the very beginning. The truth that Alexander Kim discovered did not erase the pain of the past, but it finally gave both of them something they had been missing for 2 years: understanding. After learning how the rumor had been created and how easily assumptions had replaced trust, Alexander knew there was one more thing he needed to do. He needed to face the people responsible, not because he wanted revenge, but because Emily deserved to know that the truth had been fully acknowledged. When Alexander returned to the Kong mansion, the place that once represented his greatest mistake, he no longer walked through the halls with the same certainty. He walked with reflection. The same rooms that once carried quiet memories of Emily now reminded him of the lesson he had almost forgotten. Power could protect a reputation, but it could not repair a broken trust. In the family meeting room, Alexander gathered the people involved in the rumor. Sophia sat quietly, no longer carrying the confidence she once had. The years had changed the atmosphere between them. Alexander placed the evidence on the table, explaining how the information about Emily had been manipulated and how assumptions had been presented as facts. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The disappointment in his words carried more weight than anger ever could. The greatest mistake was not the rumor, Alexander said. The greatest mistake was believing it without giving her the respect of being heard. Nobody answered, because everyone in the room understood that he was right. Later that evening, Alexander returned to Emily. He did not bring promises of wealth or a position waiting for her. He did not ask her to forget what happened. Instead, he brought something much simpler. Honesty. I cannot change the day you left, he told her. I cannot remove the disappointment you felt when I chose doubt over trust. But I can make sure I never become that person again. Emily listened carefully. She had imagined this moment many times during the 2 years they were apart. She had wondered whether Alexander would ever understand why his decision hurt so deeply. Now, seeing the sincerity in his expression, she realized that the man standing before her had changed. Not because he lost something valuable, but because he finally understood the value of what he had lost. I do not need you to fix my life, Emily said softly. I built my life after I left. Alexander nodded. I know. Then why are you here? She asked. For a moment, Alexander looked down, choosing his words carefully. Because you deserved an apology from the person who hurt you. And because I want you to know that your kindness was never the problem. My inability to recognize it was. Those words stayed between them in the quiet afternoon air. Emily did not immediately promise forgiveness. She did not pretend the past never happened. She simply allowed herself to believe that people could change when they truly faced their mistakes. Over the following months, Alexander continued showing that his transformation was real. He became more patient. He listened before making decisions. He treated every person around him with greater respect, from executives to employees who worked behind the scenes. Emily noticed the difference, not because Alexander told her he had changed, but because his actions proved it every day. The relationship between them was no longer built on authority and service. It was built on something much stronger, mutual respect. And for the first time since the day Emily left the Kong mansion, both of them understood that the future did not need to erase the past. It only needed two people willing to learn from it. Months after their reunion, the Kong mansion no longer felt like the same place where Emily Carter had once walked away with a broken sense of trust. The marble floors were still polished, the grand windows still overlooked the Chicago skyline, and the elegant rooms still carried the same luxury as before. But something important had changed. The people inside had changed. Alexander Kim had learned that a home was not defined by its size or its reputation. It was defined by how people were treated when nobody was watching. Emily never returned to the mansion as an employee. Alexander made sure of that from the beginning. He understood that asking her to return to her old position would only repeat the same mistake of seeing her value through a role instead of recognizing her as a person. Instead, he invited her into his life with respect, allowing her to choose what she wanted rather than expecting anything from her. Emily continued her work with the community that had supported her during those difficult years. She still helped others. She still carried the same kindness that had existed long before Alexander understood it. The difference was that now, he no longer overlooked it. One quiet morning, Alexander visited the community center where Emily spent her afternoons. He watched as she greeted every person with the same warmth she had always shown. An elderly woman thanked her for helping organize a neighborhood event. A young volunteer asked for her advice. Everyone around her trusted her because of who she was, not because of any connection she had. Alexander smiled softly as he realized something important. 2 years earlier, He had searched for Emily because he believed she was the person missing from his life. Now he understood that the journey had been about something deeper. He had needed to become someone worthy of the trust she once gave him. Later that day, they walked through a quiet park near the community center. The city moved around them, but the conversation remained simple. Emily asked him if he regretted everything that happened. Alexander thought carefully before answering. "I regret that I needed to lose something valuable before understanding its importance," he said. "But I am grateful that the mistake taught me something I could not learn any other way." Emily looked at him and smiled slightly. She knew forgiveness was not about pretending the past never happened. It was about recognizing when someone truly changed. The man beside her was still powerful. He was still respected. He was still the Korean Mafia boss whose name carried influence throughout the city. But he was no longer only that. He had become someone who listened before judging, someone who valued people before appearances, and someone who understood that respect was earned through actions. Years later, the story of Emily Carter and Alexander Kim was remembered not because of wealth, power, or status. It was remembered because one person learned the cost of judging too quickly, and another person showed the strength of keeping her dignity even when nobody defended her. The greatest lesson was never about finding someone after they were gone. It was about recognizing their worth before losing the chance to show it. And that day, everyone who knew their story remembered something that could never be measured by money or influence. True respect belongs to those who choose kindness, even when the world gives them every reason not to.